Leadership today can feel like a constant balancing act, moving faster, delivering results, and navigating change, all while trying to take care of your people. And the truth is, a lot of leaders are feeling stretched. Today, we're joined by Mark Miller, co-author of The Secret, What Great Leaders Know and Do, who has spent decades helping leaders grow themselves, their teams, and their organizations. Mark's work centers on a simple but powerful idea that great leaders serve. So today, we're unpacking what that really looks like in a tech-enabled world and an environment where expectations are high and the pressure just doesn't let up. Mark Miller, welcome to the Blanchard LeaderChat podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic, Chad. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you today.
So excited about The Secret not really coming back out because it's always been there. The Secret, what great leaders know and do. We're going to dive into some great questions here, but tell me about, why we needed to get this new revision out. Things have changed,
Well,
haven't they?
as you know, the first edition came out just about the time you joined Blanchard. I think that's just over 20 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And the book has enjoyed tremendous success and it has continued to sell through multiple editions. And the publisher came and said, "Hey, have you got any new content that we need to share with the world?" And Ken and I said, "Yes, we do." And so the reason there is a new edition is twofold. One, the book has continued to get traction, over 700,000 copies in 32 languages. In fact, I think we may have picked up a language or two last week on this new edition, and that we had new content and we've refreshed and rewritten about 25% of the original book. So we think there are several good reasons to send this book back out into the world.
Mark, we're so happy to have you on here. You talk with leaders all over the world. What are you hearing from them right now about what it feels like to lead in this very unique environment? And I'm telling you, it just changes almost by the day, an environment in which technology is playing such a big role and there's so much uncertainty. So it feels like more uncertainty more now than ever.
Yeah. It is a constant refrain as we do have the privilege to work with leaders all over the world. And it's a toxic mix and it varies from leader to leader and season to season, but it includes things such as busyness, distraction, complexity, fear, fatigue, even success. Anything that persistently impedes a leader's effectiveness, we call it their quicksand. And we're spending a lot of time talking to leaders about how to get out of quicksand. You really can't lead well in quicksand. You can't build culture. You can't focus on engagement. You can't develop others. Oh, by the way, you can't help others out of the quicksand if you're in it. And so the chances are really strong the leaders around you are suffering from the same challenges. And you've got organizations all over the planet that are not reaching their full potential because of quicksand. And we're trying to help leaders get out. We had a naive thought that lasted about an hour. Could we eliminate the quicksand?
Yeah.
And we decided that was a futile pursuit. So we began studying leaders who didn't spend much time, if any, in the quicksand, and we're trying to help more leaders get out.
One of the big themes of the book is that great leaders serve. So for someone hearing about it for the very first time, what does it mean to you to really serve as a leader?
Well, it's a fascinating question. Thanks for leading off with that question. When people hear that leaders need to serve, it's probably misleading. It's probably misleading to the uninformed, even well intended leader, because we use serve as an acrostic for five strategic behaviors that the best leaders demonstrate consistently. We call them the five fundamentals. So if you think we mean walk the dog, wash the car, and buy donuts, uh, it's great to do those things, but none of those are going to make you a great leader. It's only when you actually dig into the behaviors of the most successful leaders that this whole idea of serve really adds value.
It's, I've touched on this so much, and especially in other podcasts, it just seems like things are different now, and there's a lot of just, yeah, it just feels like all the time leaders feel like they're constantly putting out fires. What do you think is driving that, and what happens if they stay in that mode too
Yeah.
long, where they've got their firefighter outfit on at all times?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One, I referenced a moment ago. I think this quicksand, it invites the leader to go low instead of to go high. It invites leaders to get in, roll up their sleeves, and actually do things they shouldn't be doing. And I think there's a lack of role clarity. It's never the leader's job to do someone else's job. And so I think you got to be really, really careful, uh, because here's what happens if you, and you reference this, if you stay in this too long, you forfeit your leadership because you have finite bandwidth and finite capacity. And if you're busy doing other people's job, then by definition, you're not doing yours. And so I think it's a slippery slope. A lot of leaders get caught because they do want to serve. Let's just use that phrase, but you don't serve by doing other people's job.
You've shared that leadership really isn't about position, it's about influence. So
Mhm.
how does that shift for somebody? And what I love about this podcast, there's a lot of new leaders that find their way to this podcast. So when you think about that, like how does that shift the way someone can lead day to day if they could forget about the position and really think about where influence could be much more valuable?
Yeah, I think it makes this fourth edition even more relevant. And one of the fundamental changes, we rewrote one of the fundamentals that Ken and I, in the first edition, we referenced the importance of a leader's heart and their character, but we didn't go there. In this fourth edition, we actually say one of the fundamentals is to embody a leader's heart. And to your point about the way influence works, if your heart is not right, no one cares about your skills. And I think I can let the audience prove it to themselves. They probably know a leader who has the skills, but nobody wants to follow them.
Mm.
Well, if you've got the skills and people don't follow, what's up with that? Well, people don't trust their heart. They have questions about their character. And so, if you want to influence people, I would suggest it's more important than ever that they trust your heart.
When people hear about serving your people, servant leadership, they wonder, well, how can I do that and run a business, right? How does that connect to driving results? So, how do you think about the relationship between serving leadership
Yeah,
and
I
performance? How
think
do those
it's
fit?
a false dichotomy. Now, I would be quick to admit and acknowledge that from time to time those can be in conflict, and there's often tension, but there's real power in the tension. And I think if we, again, as Ken and I have written about, the real power is when you can embrace both. I'll tell you a quick story. I was working, your listeners may not know this, but I spent almost 45 years working at Chick-fil-A, the restaurant company. And the last 25 years, a lot of my time and energy went to how do we help the organization grow our leadership capacity. In fact, this book and this work was one of the first projects we tackled around the year 2000. Again, it became this book.
Mm.
And prior to that, I had worked in restaurant operations, and we had consultants on our corporate staff that worked with individual restaurants. And I'll never forget, we had done a reorg, and pretty much all the consultants ended up with new restaurants to serve. And there were about 30 restaurants per consultant. So we're in a meeting with all of these consultants, We're about 6 months in, and somebody raised their hand and they said, I've got a question. They said, for the last 6 months, all I've focused on is the relationship. When do I need to start talking about results? And the leader in front of the room, who shortly thereafter was promoted and became the president of the company, he said, you messed up 6 months ago. He said, you should be talking about results and relationships from the very beginning, because that is in fact how you maximize results. If you want to maximize results, you might think, well, I should just focus on results. That will undermine your results. The only way to create the highest level of performance is to value both. So don't create this false dichotomy. Don't assume you've got to do one or the other. You've got to value both.
The serve model, we're going to talk about that here and there in our conversation. The thing that strikes me a lot about that model is it starts, with seeing the future. And so, I mean, let's be honest, how can leaders really create clarity for their team when they're not sure what's going to happen a week from now, a month from now, 6 months from now?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think there's insight even in your question. Let me say, let me share a story. Over my 4.5 decades at the chicken, I had trouble holding down a job, and I ended up working in lots of different departments and functions. And one of those transitions, I was going in to lead the training and development group. And the president of the company came to introduce me, which was a nice gesture, to show his support because everybody knew me, but that was fine. He said a few words and then he left. And so I had been in front of the room for 3 or 4 minutes, probably, when a hand went up. And I acknowledged the woman that raised her hand, and she said, what's the vision? Now, I don't know if that surprises any of the listeners here or not. It did not surprise me because people expect their leaders to have vision, even if you've been their leader for 3 minutes. And I began to talk about a future where we would have more reach, more impact, and more influence. And she stopped me. She said, I'm not talking about any of that. And I said, well, what is your question? She said, is my program going to be continued? Where am I going to sit? And who's going to be my supervisor? And I said, I don't know any of that. I said, and we'll figure that out together. But I can promise you that in our future, we're going to have more reach, we're going to have more impact, and we're going to have more influence. So here's the deal. Most people want certainty, but they'll settle for clarity. And I think we've got to be very careful as leaders. We can rarely provide certainty. I tell people there are at least two things I think you can provide certainty on: your intentions and that level of energy that you're going to exert. So my caution to leaders is don't fall in the trap of providing certainty. It like you said, we don't know what's going to happen Friday, much less 6 months or 6 years into the future. But I will close by saying some of your audience has heard the name Peter Drucker, great management and leadership thinker who did much of his work 30, 40, 50 years ago. But his stuff is much like Ken's. It's timeless insight and wisdom. And my favorite Peter Drucker quote is the best way to predict the future is to create it. And so I think we can be really, really clear on our intent. And once our intent is clear, we can begin to rally people to make it a reality.
You write about engaging people, not just their hands, the hands, the work they're doing, but also the heads and the hearts. What does that actually look like to you when it's done right?
Yeah, I think when it's done right, there's one test, and it's how much people care. It's how much they care about their work, how much they care about their coworkers, how much they care about the customer, and how much they care about the organization. And when you get somebody that cares in those domains, you've got a fully engaged team member.
Some of the things we see come up a lot here at Blanchard in conversations with our clients, with leaders and others is this tension, right? This tension between taking care of their people, delivering results. We kind of touched on that a little bit, and how those two things actually work together. When you look at leaders who are doing this really well, how are they thinking about performance and well-being at the same time? What really sets them apart? Because the well-being of if you don't have your people and if you're running them ragged, you don't have anything.
Yeah. Um, Again, you don't need to separate the two. There will be times when they are separate, but if you if you treat it as one thing with two parts versus two separate things, and I know that sounds weird. Let me tell you a quick story. I mentioned earlier that I had moved into restaurant operations, and I went to the president of the company to explain a recommendation to actually terminate someone because assuming he approved, then it had to go to Truett. I already mentioned that. And I laid out the case and he said, I agree, not now. And I said, I'm confused. At least I said that to myself. And so I repeated myself, kind of restating my case as to why I felt like we needed to terminate this individual. And he said, I heard you the first time. I agree, not now. Then I said out loud, I'm confused. He said it's a week before Thanksgiving. He said this man has done nothing immoral, illegal, or unethical. Said you're not going to send him home the week before Thanksgiving to tell his family he's lost his business. He said you have this conversation with him in January. And that gave me a little bit of insight as to what it meant to value results and relationships. It's like, yeah, we're going to take care of the business and we're going to have this really hard, life changing conversation with this guy in 6 weeks, as opposed to doing it right now, because we want to honor him and in this case, and his family in this process. You just say we're going to do both. It's a bigger, broader, deeper, more challenging definition of success, but I've already referenced it also drives higher levels of performance because when people know you care about them and the business, there are too many leaders that just care about the business. So you're going to differentiate yourself right out of the chute when you care about both. Don't separate them.
So when people go out and pick up this book, as we talked about before, that serve model, it's there. So when you really think about applying that model, where have you found leaders tend to struggle the most when they try to put those ideas into practice? And then on the flip side of that, what can actually help them make the shift?
Wow. Okay, that's a big question. This is probably a good place for my standard disclaimer to your audience that I love Q&A and I hate Q&A. I mean, I never want to be the guy guilty of answering questions that people aren't asking, but at the same time, I don't want to be guilty of giving 10-cent answers to million-dollar questions. And so I would say, please do not interpret the brevity of my response with the magnitude of the question. So this is a good place for that disclaimer. I think several things come to mind immediately that make this challenging, this transition, if you will. One is old habits. There's muscle memory that leaders develop, and some over decades. And you're saying, yeah, I got it. But if you want to take your game to another level, you've got to do some things fundamentally differently. Well, they may have years, maybe decades of less effective practices that are in fact getting them by. So I think you've got to encourage, you've got to challenge, you've got to cast vision for, yeah, but what would happen if you could improve your performance and the performance of your team 10, 15, 20, 40, 50%? Well, you might get their attention because most of the leaders I know care about performance. Yeah, but you're going to have to do some things differently. I'm reminded I went and met with a golf pro and said, I think I need some help. And he watched me swing and he said, are you sure you want to do this? And I said, well, I'm here, right? I'm paying you. What do you mean? What do you mean? Am I sure I want to do this? And he said, well, he said, all we have to do is undo 40 years of bad habits. So I think you just got to be, it's a new, in many ways, it's a new paradigm for sure. It's a new mindset, but in some ways, it's a new skill set. And so I think old habits are a real challenge. One more challenge, because we could probably list several, and you see this given what Blanchard does for a living as a training and development company. We often don't prepare people. We don't equip people. I was talking to a leader about doing some training on the content of this book for his leaders. And he said, oh, we don't want any training. We're just going to ask them to read the book. Like, well, the book is good, but it's not training. And to tell somebody to see the future or to engage and develop others or to reinvent continuously, any of the fundamentals, to tell them, here's what it means, here's what it looks like, and say, go do that. They're actually best practices that will help people make that transition to put those fundamentals in place. Be like, using the language of fundamental from sports, it'd be like telling a linebacker, you need to make good tackles. Well, unless they've been taught what a good tackle looks like, that the chances of them making good tackles are really slim because they've not been instructed. So I know Blanchard's been making a living for 30, 40 years teaching people how to do the things that he writes about. I see a lot of organizations that actually love the ideas, but it falls short because they don't actually do the training. So, my advice, I think that was the last part of your question. Those are the two predominant challenges that I see is is start small and give yourself a lot of grace. It's like, particularly if you're one of those leaders who has a lot of muscle memory, that to try and do things differently, to say, okay, what would it look like here to value results and relationships in this setting, in this moment? And just take it one step at a time. I think that would be, and be patient with yourself and ask for your people to be patient with you. Um, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised in relatively short order how people will rally around you
And
once you take these steps.
thank you, Mark. So we're at Blanchard really focused on the idea of human-centered leadership. And so we can talk all day about performance, we can talk all day about results. I'd love to hear your perspective on what can you do better just in general as a leader, new, longtime leader, if they're not focusing on their people enough. What are some of the shifts they can do where they can actually take care of their people and take it away from the results? I know you said they go hand in hand, but what if when you
Yeah.
realize, man, I have really been dropping the ball on that one side of that equation?
Well, I think there has to be a decision by a leader at some level, the higher the better, that says, here's the way we're going to think about, approach, and practice leadership. Because you need somebody to cast the vision for what we've been talking about today. Now, maybe you've got an individual leader who hears what we're talking about today or reads the book and they embrace that vision themselves. But I'm talking about those that are skeptical, reluctant, or just not on board. At some point, that's not okay. And it's going to take a leader to help people understand that. What gets recognized and rewarded is what gets repeated. And again, at some point, it's going to ultimately, to be pervasive in a culture, it has to be part of the culture. I know what we did at Chick-fil-A, again, a lot of organizations are doing this around the world, is when they evaluate a leader, they evaluate them on two attributes: performance and leadership. And you don't you don't advance to the next level. You don't get more responsibility if you just hit the numbers, but you're not leading in alignment with the way the organization says it wants to lead. In fact, ultimately, those leaders can lose the opportunity to lead because if that's what the organization has said we are working towards, we are striving to become, then people don't have the option over time to opt out. And those are some hard conversations, but um, yeah, it's going to take some accountability at some level if you've got men and women who just don't want to play along, which again is the courage that we referenced earlier. It's like part of a leader's heart is um, their willingness and ability to respond with courage. There are going to be some conversations along the way that are going to be necessary for
Mark,
those that are reluctant.
When you think about the future, what do you believe is going to truly define a high performing leader as things continue to evolve?
Yeah, I think the same things with even more importance. I think the leaders who can honor people and sustain elite levels of performance because the workforce is more mobile than ever. And my assumption is it will continue to be increasingly mobile, right? When I grew up, people were getting with one company and working there 20, 30, 40 years. I'm meeting people now in their 40s who've had 8 jobs. And the last data I saw said that the college graduate is going to have at least 12 jobs and 3 career changes by the end of their career. And so I, I think if you're not honoring people, you're not going to sustain elite levels of performance, but you're going to sub-optimize performance. I know that's been a theme today. Um, because if people don't feel honored, if they don't feel cared for, they're an immediate flight risk, at least if they're A players, the good ones. Um, they really do want to be well led. They really do.
When you think about your own leadership journey and you think about the biggest heart shift that occurred for you, to something I'm pulling in from the book, what triggered it?
It was a conversation, and I will confess, it was the moment that comes to mind was probably more of a head shift than a heart shift. And it happened many, many decades ago. I mean, over 40 years ago. And it was a conversation with a leader who was challenging me. He said, I'm going to tell you how the world works. And I said, do you know how the world works? And he said, absolutely. And he said, if you want more influence, you want more opportunity, and you want more impact, there's only one path. And I said, what's that? And he said, lifelong learning. And I went, well, that's interesting. He said, yeah. He said, that's the way it works. You look at men and women who've added the most value throughout their career, and they all have one thing in common. They're lifelong learners. Now, my parents wish he and I had that conversation years earlier because I was a lousy student. But I made a strategic life decision that changed the trajectory of my career. I said, I'm going to sign up for that. And I think there are a lot of men and women who would say, well, that's not my natural bent or that's not my natural bias. Some of the listeners are probably familiar with strength finders
Hmm.
and 34 different attributes. And I mean, people love strength finders because they tell you what you're good at, which is a great business model. It served Gallup well. Um, but somebody said, I bet learner is in your top 5 because they'll give you a numeric list. And I said, no, it's not my top 5. It's not my top 10. It's not my top 20. I don't think learner is in my top 25. And they said, well, that's odd. I said, why is it odd? They said, well, you act like a learner. I said, did I not tell you the story? I made this strategic decision 40 years ago that I wanted more influence, more opportunity, and more impact. And I said, I'm going to choose to be a learner.
Mark, you've been around a little bit, and I'm going to ask you a question about everything you've learned about leadership. If you think back, can you recall a moment in your own leadership journey where you realized you were still being self-serving? And what do you think that moment taught you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there was a time when within our organization, I was the guy on stage a lot, and I realized that I was stealing from the next generation. I said, I think I'm going to do this differently. And I'm going to start developing communicators, and I'm going to invest in communicators, and I'm going to start giving them the opportunities that come my way. And one of those people today has since left the chicken and is a professional communicator. Others have moved into senior leadership in part because they knew how to communicate. And I look back and I think I've got to continue to keep my eye on others. I've got to continue to keep my eye on the future. Um, and let me share a quick assignment for the folks listening. And this is something I have been doing for decades, and it's really been helpful to me. And I think it ties in nicely with that story. What would happen if you tried to add value to every person you meet for the next 24 hours as an experiment? Now, there are people listening that are saying, well, that's impossible. Hang on, listen to what I said. I want you to try to add value. It's the trying that changes you. Because when you're trying to add value to someone else, who are you thinking about? You're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about the other person, whether you're encouraging them or thanking them or recognizing them or correcting them or resourcing them. I mean, you can make a long, long list of ways that you can add value to others. And this will change the way you see the world. I had a consultant one time did a 360 for me, and he came in and he was concerned about my results. And I said, well, tell me what's concerning. And he said, when you walk in a room, you're not trying to take charge. And I said, well, that's correct. Thanks for noticing. Why does that concern you? He said, that's what leaders do. And I said, well, that may be your definition and construct of a leader. I said, when I'm walking into a room, I'm trying to figure out how I can add the most value. And I said, sometimes it is to take charge, and other times it's to take out the trash. And to this day, I'm convinced that that guy had no concept of what I was talking about. I was actually talking about the type of leader that Ken and I wrote about. Just try to add value. And I think if you'll try it for 24 hours, you might try it for the rest of your life.
I love that. It's a wonderful assignment. As we start to wrap this up, I always like to kind of close with with this question. If you know our listeners just take away one idea, if they just take away one theme, if they just take away just one thing that they can use in their day to day from our conversation, what would you like it to be?
Well, that little experiment's a pretty good place to start. But if you're not ready for that, I would say start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. I mean, don't wait. Don't wait on the title. Don't wait on the official role and responsibility, because men and women who do the things we've talked about today, regardless of your title, you'll be given, in most cases, you'll be given more responsibility. You'll be given more opportunity, and you'll get those titles that perhaps you really want. But just don't wait. Um, we chose to name our company. When I left Chick-fil-A, I took an early retirement after 45 years, which is a little odd. I asked them how long you needed to stay to get a full retirement, but that was another story for another day. And I'm continuing to do the exact same work, trying to encourage and equip leaders around the world, trying to serve 100 million leaders in the next 7 years. So that's what we're chasing. But we named our company Lead Every Day, and I think that's my closing encouragement for your listeners here. Just don't wait. Just lead every day. Don't wait on the title. Don't wait on the perfect team. Don't wait on the perfect circumstances. Um, the world needs leaders to step up and serve, and you can be that leader.
Beautiful. If people want to dig a little bit deeper into you, dig a little bit deeper into this wonderful book, where would you send them?
I got two thoughts for you. First, leadeveryday.com. That's like the whole kitchen sink. And then let me give you my cell number. It's 678-612-8441. 678-612-8441. And if you'd please put that in the show notes, Chad, because somebody's probably on a treadmill or in a car and they can't jot that down. Uh, I'd appreciate that very much. And reach out to me if there's anything I can do to serve you.
The book is called The Secret: What Great Leaders Know and Do. Mark Miller, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your schedule to be with us here on the Blanchard Leader Chat podcast.
It was my pleasure.